I like to say, a little controversial, but I couldn't care less. We have a lot of bad criminals that came into this country, and they came in stupidly. It was an unforced error. It was an incompetent president that allowed it to happen. It was an auto pen maybe that allowed it to happen, and it did happen. But we also have a lot of bad people that have been here for a long time. People that whack people over the head with a baseball bat from behind when they're not looking and kill them. People that knife you when you're walking down the street. They're not new to our country. They're old to our country. Many of them were born in our country. I think we ought to get them the hell out of here, too. You want to know the truth. So maybe that'll be the next job that we'll work on together. But I think getting them out, we forget about them. We had some bad accidents in New York, and they're not accidents.
Revelations chapter 12, verse 12. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. First and foremost, I'm going to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachak Wadash. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone, who were very well, very beautifully. Double salutations to the Akim I heard pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is the brother Corner Watt from the Arizona Great Millstone Camp. Come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. Check this out, man. Right, as you've seen in the video, right, Trump is talking about, which we have it right here. I'll just, reread it again. This is a post on Reddit, or what do you say, a tweet, or a post on X, right? Posted on Reddit, right? It says, breaking, Trump now openly calling for the deportation of U.S. citizens, because that's who he was talking about, those who are homeborn, who are homegrown, right? Which we've seen a video prior, right? Him talking to, the president of El Salvador, and that's when he made that comment, but now he making this, open, out in the open, during, an actual meeting or address, if you will, right? Talking about those that have been here, right, for a long time, that were born here, right? Which 2 Corinthians 2:11, we're not ignorant of Satan's devices. We understand, right, that his whole goal, right, is to come after the Israelites, right, the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, as well as, the Israelite foreigners, right, which are Israelites that have been scattered into the other nations that look like these nations, right, began to look like these nations throughout time, but yet through the lineage of their father are Israelites. This is who Esau, Edom's attention is on, right? We see it, right, because of that perpetual hatred. Ezekiel 35 and verse 5, right, him trying to get his birthright back. We see it where his attention's at, because all these different nations that came across the border, right, when the borders were open and all these people were crossing the border, hundreds of thousands, right, at a time, it wasn't just, so-called, Hispanics, so-called Latinos, so-called natives, right, that were coming across that border, right? You had different nations as well, but his main focus is on you Israelites, right? And we've seen, where his focus has been since Trump has came into office, right? It's been on, mainly, right, the northern tribes, the so-called Mexicans, so-called Latinos, or so-called natives. That's who he's really been attacking. We've been seeing it these last, couple months, right? Really since he became in, or since Trump became president again, right? We've been seeing it ramp up heavily. Protests, ultimately sprang off all over the United States. They had that No King's Day, and through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shem Shai, again, the prophet's been reporting on it, right? But they've also been making a statement, right? Which is very true as you go into the scriptures, right? That Judah got, or Slakia, that the northern kingdom got it first and the southern kingdom got it the worst, and now we're starting to see, right, Esau, shifting his focus, right, from only the northern tribes to now he's coming at the southern tribes as well, by making this statement. We have a lot of bad people. Many of them were born in our country. I think we ought to get them the hell out of here too, right? And we know this also by him also, removing, right? Over 500,000 Haitians, right, which are the southern tribes, right, the Levites, right, removing their visas, you know. And then now what they're saying is anybody that has committed a crime, right, which we're going to get right here, but I want to finish this off, you know, is ultimately going to be targeted, right? It says that's not immigration policy. That's fascism with a passport scanner. He's not talking about illegals anymore. He's talking about you, about anyone who disagrees, you know? So this is, again, right, you know, a huge point as well, because this right here tells you that anybody who is against his system, right, is ultimately going to be targeted, you know, which means the persecution, right, is ultimately going to arise, right, just based off of, you know, this, you know, standpoint, right? We already, you know, we understand that the northern tribes, right, they're getting attacked too. That is already an opening, but this further opens up, right, for the whole nation, right, to be persecuted, and really more importantly, the men of the Lord, the prophets, right? Because that's who Esau's trying to eliminate, those who are speaking against his system, right? It says about journalists, activists, protesters, citizens, right? So let's grab this. And this is heavy as well, right? This article, which is on the Newsbreak app, right? Again, pointing out that anybody who is against his system, anybody that he deems, right, to have commit a crime, you know, is ultimately going to be targeted and going to be, you know, have their citizenship revoked, right, and deported, and or thrown into these different, you know, camps that they got set up, right? They have the alligator Alcatraz, right, over there in Florida, right, and there's many others, right, that are being set up all throughout the United States, right? It says DOJ looking at denaturalization of American citizens convicted of certain crimes, right? Again, we have to remember that who is he focusing on? Right? He's focusing on the Israelites, right? So you best believe that this is going to, you know, be targeting, you know, directly Israelites, right? It says the Department of Justice prioritizing revoking citizenship from some naturalized Americans who commit certain crimes, right? And they're only going to say a couple of these different, you know, crimes, right? But we know that there's a long list, and as we're going to read, they were basically giving, you know, you know, that leeway to decide, right, what they can, you know, or when they can use that denaturalization, basically saying when you know, what crimes are going to be, you know, are going to be used as, you know, motive to denaturalize somebody, right? It says the Department of Justice is prioritizing revoking citizenship from naturalized Americans who commit certain crimes, according to a DOJ memo posted online. In the memo dated June 11th, Assistant Attorney General Brett Shumate is giving U.S. attorneys wide discretion to decide when to pursue the denaturalization process in order to advance the administration's policy objectives. So they're basically saying, hey, you know, there's many reasons, right, why you can denaturalize somebody, right, according to Esau Edom, right? Many different crimes, right? So it could be a petty crime, you know, and they'll just ultimately take away your citizenship, you know, and you know, fly you out, you know, which, you know, the elder Yashawamba, right, did a video and mentioned, you know, how they're ultimately shackling. It's like, let me, my phone's about to croak. But there's many reasons, or many, you know, there's different videos that are coming out about them shackling, finding bodies that were shackled and basically thrown overboard, you know, and dropped out of, you're not thrown overboard, but dropped out of an airplane, thrown into the ocean, you know, and their bodies are being found, right, on you know, on land somewhere, right? It says, as the Trump administration pursues its ongoing immigration crackdown, it says, while attorneys are urged to prioritize cases involving individuals who possess a potential danger to national security, the memo also states that they can seek out any other cases referred to the civil division that the division determines to be sufficiently important to pursue, right? So they're not giving you necessarily what are these other cases, right? What are these other cases, right? It says what pose a potential danger to national security, right? Somebody trying to bomb, the embassy or bomb certain government facilities, this and the third. Okay, that makes sense. But what are these other instances that they're talking about, or other cases, right? They're not stating that, right? It says the civil division shall prioritize the maximally pursue denaturalization proceedings in all cases permitted by law and supported by evidence. So permitted by law, and we know, right, which they're going to mention in this article, right? We now know that they're setting up anti-hate laws, right? Semantism laws, right? So if you speak, right, or if you just say something, right, that somebody considers to be hateful, or somebody considers, or if you speak against the JOOs, the small hats, and then guess what? Now that's a crime that they can ultimately, use to say, now we're taking away your citizenship, and we're gonna denaturalize you, and we're gonna ship you out, or throw you in one of these camps, because now you're not a citizen, you're here illegally, we can detain you. Right? You see how the persecution is building just based off of, them coming after, again, that 14th Amendment, or the denaturalization, of citizens, right? The natural born citizenship, attacking it and removing it. These are heavy times that we're in, but again, I'm going to continue to read, right? It says some of the cases U.S. attorneys should pursue are those against individuals who have engaged in torture, war crimes, human trafficking, and human rights violations, the memo says, right? So these are some of the major ones, right? It says while the denaturalization process and requirements are codified into law, immigration attorney Rosanna Berardi says the memo changes how aggressively the Department of Justice plans to pursue these cases, right? It says, we got a little bit left, right? It says the memo clearly signals that DOJ is going to pursue more of these cases, and not just against terrorists, right, or war criminals. Even cases involving undisclosed criminal records or procedural errors during naturalization are now on the radar. So again, they're not saying, right, they're saying, they're saying all the major ones, right? But what are they talking about these other ones, right? Even cases involving undisclosed criminal records, Again, showing you that they're opening up the door for really grabbing and nabbing up everybody, which is Jacob's trouble. Because who are the ones that they're always, coming after and throwing into these jails and prisons over the smallest of crimes? It's Jake. Right? The so-called black man fills the freaking, prison systems. All the tribes, right? But mainly the so-called black man, right? Fills the prison systems, man. Millions and millions and millions and millions of Jakes, right, are in the system, right? The prison system, man. For obviously, Jake be doing stupid shit, and a lot of his judgment, right, for the most part, But you even got cases where Esau Edom is throwing it, like you see him all the time. You got dudes who are accused of grape, right, 40-something years ago, right, are being released and not getting any kind of, major recompense or, no money, no compensation at all for those 40-something years, having to come out to the world fucked up and institutionalized, right? Esau fucking, that shit's a joke to him, So you best believe Esau's going to use this, right? And not necessarily stating, what kind of, smaller crimes that, giving them the full layout of what they're looking for, that's going to allow, what did it say? Give them wide discretion, on when to pursue that denaturalization process, man. So it could be literally for any reason. Right? It says, Berardi told ABC News, in the past 28 years of my practice, the government has generally left naturalized U.S. citizens alone. This is a departure from that mentality. According to the report conducted by the Immigration Legal Resource Center in 2020, the government pursued denaturalization cases at a very low rate, averaging only 11 cases per year from 1990 to 2017. It says, but those cases skyrocketed under Trump's first administration. In 2018, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services said it intended to refer 1,600 cases to DOJ for persecution. There you go. They're saying it outright. For persecution, because that's what's going to happen, it says, the report says, the DOJ memo also lays out 4 other priorities for the department, which include, here you go, ending anti-Semitism and legal action against sanctuary states and jurisdictions. So here you go. They say it's a blatant attack, right, on the men of the Lord. Right? That's who Esau Edom is coming after. You know? Jacob's trouble is around the corner. Famine of the word is around the corner. Persecution is around the corner. All these different things that, you know, that the prophets, you know, have been telling you, right? That we've been telling you through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shem El Shai for years, beginning with the elder apostles on down, you know, things that we've been telling y'all for years are happening, right? They're coming to pass. Legislation is being set up, tore down, right? Legislation that, you know, is against their agenda. They're removing it and setting up different, you know, legislation, you know, in its stead. You know, they're disregarding the Constitution. The government is now is being, you know, Donald Trump is a king, right? He's moving like a king. He is a king, right? There's supposed to be 3 different branches of the government, right? Legislative, executive, and judicial. And see, we're only seeing the executive moving around, right? Which is the president, right? And whatnot, you know? Which we understand, hey, this right here is gonna cause, you know, a lot of chaos too, man. You know, because him coming after Jake. You know, and you're seeing the videos of Jake saying, hey, no, you know, this, we got to get into this fight, you know. You know, but, which that could be propaganda, you know, from Esau, you know, as well, man. You know, but nonetheless, right, the point of the lesson is, hey, Esau is going to utilize, you know, this to, you know, come after the men of the Lord. You know. Let's go ahead and hit a few scriptures, right? This is St. John chapter 15 and verse 18. It says, if the world hate you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. And this is the words of Yahweh Shai, right? Speaking, you know, to the disciples. You know? It says, if you were of the world would love his own. Right? So we would be all buddy with these people. These people wouldn't have no hatred toward us. You know? Esau wouldn't be coming at us like this, you know, setting up different legislation to, you know, to ultimately persecute us, right? Even as he said, right? Blatantly saying it right there. You know, but he wouldn't be doing that if we were of the world, man. But we're not, right? We're not with Esau Edom and his system and the way he rolls and how these people are acting and conducting themselves. We're not with this shit, man. So we're a target, right? It says, but because you're not of this world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. We are a target. Right? It says, remember the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my sayings, they will keep yours also. Right? So that, you know, again, right, go back and read about, you know, what they did to Yahweh Shai. Now, Yahweh Shai got the worst of it, right? Scriptures say that he was marred more than any man, you know, but, hey, we're walking, you know, in that, on that same path. So Yahweh Shai got the persecution. He was beaten, right? He was spat on, or he was punched, hitting with sticks, you know? He was crucified. His own people went against him, the same ones he died for. So you best believe that we're going to go through it too. Right? In order to be those heirs with the promise. And we got to go through that whole process. Just as the front runner did, right? Yahweh Shai, just as he did. You know? And it's because, right, as you read in verse 21, but all these things they will do unto you for my name's sake, but because they know him, it's like they know not him that sent me. That's right. Because we serve Yahweh Shem El Shai. That's why this is going to happen. That's why everything's going on. And the Lord's commanding us to do what? To reveal this devil. You know, Luke 12:2, Luke 8:17, right? We bring those scriptures out all the time. You know, and quote those scriptures all the time. Because that's the time, that's also a sign of the time that we're in. Right? Pursuing the 2 Thessalonians, matter of fact, we'll grab it. Chapter 2 and verse 3, it says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come. And what day is that? That's talking about the day of destruction. Right? The day of evil. Right? Shall not come until what? Except their coming and falling away first, which happened. Right? Us turning away from our power, Yahweh Shemel Shai, and us being put into captivity. Right? To be physically and spiritually destroyed. You know? And by physically, I mean you to be bugged out, receive all different types of diseases, to be killed by our enemies. You know, so on and so forth. Right? And again, spiritually, we didn't know who we are. We didn't know who our power was. That's because we departed from Yahweh Shemel Shai. That was part of that. Right? That was a prophecy that had to happen, as well as it says right here, right? And that the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Again, going back, he needs to be revealed, right? In order for the destruction to take place, in order for deliverance to happen. And we've been seeing it, right? And as we read in what is that, Job 15 verse 21, it says, what? A dreadful sound is in his ears. He didn't like the fact that this truth was coming out. You know? So what he had to do, he had to basically go back, you know, go back into the huddle, right? And get a new play set up. You know? And now we're seeing that play being played out. Right? Esau throwing, you know, a few lobs, running through the line, you know what I mean? Moving the chains. Right? By, again, setting up the different legislation, tearing down that old legislation, right? And you know, ultimately, you know, experimenting. Right? Because we understand that, you know, he has a agenda, right? Order ab chaos, you know, which is order out of chaos. So meaning there has to be chaos, right? And he's going to try to bring order and bring, you know, solace or peace out of that chaos, right? By way of a solution, right? Only this devil is playing both sides of the field, right? So he's already created his solution, which is the RFID micro C hip, right? Because that's his agenda, right? So to get everybody connected, you know, digitally, right, to his data system, you know, so that way he has control. That goes into the next verse in 2 Thessalonians 2 and 4. Why I'm wanting to be the Most High, which we brought that out, you know, a few lessons back. You know, that's what his whole agenda is to set himself up as the Most High, right? So he has to basically create the technology. He has to set up the legislation. He has to get all the chess pieces in place in order to do that. And so we're seeing that happen and you know, and it's coming to fruition, you know. But see, again, the Lord set up prophets, right? Rose them, you know, out of that dead state, right? And set them upon their feet, right? That great army, and started to speak against this damn devil. And that's why I said, and fear fell upon them, which saw them, right? Esau is hearing this, right? It says a dreadful sound is in his ears. He's hearing and seeing us on the highways and byways, right? Video epistles going out, right? And he can't stop it. Right? And the only way that he's going to be able to, right, is, again, getting everybody connected to the internet system, you know, and then eliminating those who are against him, right? By shutting down this old system, establishing a new system, getting everybody connected to it, or making it to where you have to be a part of that system in order to live, right? Being a part of this beast system, having this charagma, right? So that you can buy and sell. And that goes back to Revelations 13 and 16, right? He's going to put everybody in the position that they needed, You know? And we're speaking on this. And we're bringing it out. And we're showing who he is and all the wickedness that he has done. That's why it says, a dreadful sound in his ears. In prosperity, the destroyer shall come upon him. And he will be removed out of power. You know? He will be removed out of power. He's not going to stay in power. You know? But until then, right, he's going to try to do everything he can. You know? And then what he's trying to do right now is, again, to silence the prophet, silence, right, the words of Yahweh Shemiel Shai. You know, by coming after us. Right? This right here is a major step towards that. You know? Throwing us into these FEMA camps. You know? And you know, doing what he do. Being a damn devil, man. You know, but the Lord said what? In Revelations 2 and 10. And, you know, I didn't plan to do this lesson, man, when I ultimately was, looking at everything that was going on. I was, ultimately going to speak on, really the 2/3, but the Spirit hit, man. Spirit, hey, you got to follow the Spirit, man. But this is Revelations 2 and 10. It says, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that you may be tried, right? We're going to be thrown into these FEMA camps. Again, they got that alligator Alcatraz being set up, as well as they have different ones, man, that are not ultimately being put in the media, that are being built up all over the United States, right? So Esau's preparing for this, right? Jacob's trouble is truly around the corner, It's truly around the corner, man. It's real close. It could be, within the next month or two, right? With everything that, is going on and how everything's happening, right? Esau is ready to cause the chaos. And we ready for him to do so as well. You already have the supply chain, has been, crippled for years now. End of 2019 till now, right? With the whole, ports going down. They had the protest at the, with the different ports, right? The shutdowns at the ports. You got nations, ditching the dollar. You got World War III, right? Brewing heavy. Everything is ripe at this moment, man. We are in these times. And it's a beautiful time to be in the Spirit. It's a beautiful time, to be serving Yahweh Shemiel Shai, knowing and trying to please to the best of our ability, Yahweh Shemiel Shai every day. Right? It's truly a blessing, man, because of everything that's going on, man. Right? So we have to remember that, right? We have to remember, right, that going through this, it's not going to be easy. It's not meant to be easy. It says right here, it says in each it says, that ye may be tried. It's going to be a trial of our faith, and this is why, like the disciples did, right? We got to pray for more faith every single day, right? We got to pray for endurance, right? We got to pray that Yahweh Shemiel Shai take not that spirit away from us, like King David did in Psalm the 51st chapter, I can't remember what brother said it, man. It might have been the Elder Maya Ka'ala, from the LA camp, his YouTube channel being GMS Inspiration of the Almighty. I think he made the statement. I think it was that brother, if I'm not mistaken. And Salaki if I am, but I think that brother made a statement and said, we need to pray what we read. Right? All these different prayers that our forefathers, were praying about. We need to pray those prayers as well, man. When they were all those prayers, we throw those, in our repertoire. And that will help us and allow us to keep moving forward. Right? It says, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Fear none of them, man. Because at the end of the day, what does the scripture say? Fear not one that can hurt your body, but fear the one that can hurt your body and soul in hell. Or we fear Yahweh Shemiel Shai. We don't fear Esau either, man. Because all he can do is hurt the body. All he can do is hurt the body, and that's it. Right? Matter of fact, I do want to grab this account you know, spirits, tugging towards it, man. This goes into the mother and her 7 sons, you know. I think I have this highlighted. No, but I'm gonna have to find, because it's, so like, bear with me, man. I do want to jump around in this. I didn't necessarily have this planned, but I do want to touch on it, right? This is 2 Maccabees 7. Again, this is going to a beautiful count of those, who were ultimately snatched up, by Esau, man, and they remained faithful to Yahweh Shem Shai, remain faithful to Yahweh Shem Shai through and through, and receive that crown of life, as as we're gonna go back and finish, right? 2 Maccabees 7 and verse 1, it says, it came to pass also that 7 brethren with their mother were taken and compelled by the king against the law to taste swine's flesh, and were tormented with scourges and whips, right? So they were ultimately bribed, right, to eat the swine's flesh, and to ultimately, they're trying to be encouraged, say you got to eat it, otherwise you're going to die. They weren't with, right, that system. They weren't with following, the ways of the world or the ways of the heathen, right, which is the same mentality that we have to be in. It says, but one of them that spake first said thus, what wouldest thou ask or learn of us? We are ready to die rather than to transgress the laws of our fathers, right? That's the same spirit we got to be in, right? We got to be ready to die for Yahweh Shem Yahushua. And I didn't mean for that to rhyme, It says, then the king, being enraged, commanded pans and cauldrons to be made hot. So they were going to boil them, man. Cook them alive, man. Kill them. It says, which forthwith being heated, he commanded to cut out the tongue of him that spake first, and to cut off the uttermost parts of his body, the rest of his brother and his mother looking on. And you might have to see that. Esau might use your family right against you. Esau might, snatch at, which, brothers have had visions. I personally had a vision of my family being used, and this is why the scriptures also say, right, that if you have a wife, be as though you have none, right? We got to, first and foremost, put Yahweh Shem Shai first, and believe and hope, right, that Yahweh Shem Shai delivers us with our families. It says, verse 5, it says, now when he was thus maimed and all his members, he commanded him, being yet alive, to be brought to the fire and to be fried in the pan. And as the vapor of the pan was for a good space dispersed, they exhorted one another with the mother to die manfully, saying thus, so they were, talking to each other. It's like, hey, they were bigging each other up. Imagine the spirit that you got to be in, right? It says that they what? They were encouraging, it's like it says, they exhorted, right, which goes back to the word encourage. Let's look that word up. Right. It says to exhort, right, and encourage, right? You got this, bro. When somebody, you're going up an opponent or something like that, bro, you got it, man. You've been training, you did good. You know what I mean? You way better than him, you strong. You start talking them up, And it might not have been exactly that, right? But that's what they were doing to encourage him, They could be saying something to the degree of, hey, this is a great honor, right, to die for Yahweh Shem Yahushai, right, and you receive your blessings, right, from the hand of Yahweh Shem Yahushai. As we read, right, those that ultimately died for Yahweh Shem Yahushai ultimately received that crown. Revelations 20 and verse 4, those that were beheaded for the name of Yahweh Shem Yahushai, what shall reign with them 1,000 years? Those who stand stiffly, right? Second chapter. So they could have been, encouraging them like that, saying those things, But nonetheless, it's heavy, man, right? And when we do that, right, by these video epistles, man, those who are, who are out here, sacrificing their life, for Yahweh Shem Shai, representing their bodies as a living sacrifice that we read in Romans the 12th chapter, right? This is ultimately a video of encouragement, right? When we bring out Revelations 2 and verse 10, right? Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. No, man. Because again, our reward is with Yahweh Shem Shai. Esau can't do shit to us, man. Right? There's really no such thing as dying, man, because our spirit just goes back to the Heavenly Father, It's just this flesh, right? Ultimately is not working. We go back to the spiritual realm, man. And at that point, we're perfect, right? We don't feel like this flesh is, as what the scriptures call it, chains of darkness, right? That's what it is. It's chains, right? But we can be released of these chains, right? And Lord will, right? The elect are soon going to be released from these chains into those immortal, bodies, man. Being faithful to Yahweh Shem Shai, right? It says, the Lord power looketh upon us, and in truth hath comfort in us, as Moses in his song, which witnessed to their faces, declared, saying, and he shall be comforted in his servants. So when the first was dead after this number, they brought the second to make him a mocking stock. And when they had pulled off the skin of his head with the hair, they asked him, wilt thou eat, before thou be punished throughout every member of thy body? Right? So he's saying they're fucking, bro, they're scalping him, and they're asking him, oh, you gonna do it? You gonna do it? But here you go, verse 8 says, but he answered in his own language and said, no. Right? So he answered in the Hebrew, right? No. La'ah. Wherefore he also received the next torment in order as the former did. And this whole account, this whole chapter is beautiful, right? It goes through, all the sons go through this, man. All of the sons, right, remain faithful to Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, right? No matter what came upon them. That's the same spirit that we have to be in. Those are the examples that we have to follow, right? So when we read this, and you can go read the rest of the chapter, right? This is Revelations 2 and 10. When we read this, right, we have to really feel this scripture, man, and pray that Yahweh Shem Shai allow us to be in that spirit, right? Verse 10, it says, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast you into prison. Again, alligator Alcatraz, and again, many other ones, right? They opened Guantanamo Bay. They opened actual Alcatraz, right? They're sending, people to different countries, right? That can happen to one of us, to go in any of one of these places, man, and be tortured by Esau Edom, right? To be beaten within an inch of our lives, right? But we can't, be afraid of that, right? It says, ye shall have, it says that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days, right? So it could be actual 10 days, but we know 10 is the number of completion. It could be a week, 2 weeks, a month, It don't matter how long as we do what? Be thou faithful unto death. So remain faithful to Yahweh Shem Shai. And it says, and I will give thee a crown of life, meaning we're gonna get the victory, But see, not everyone is gonna have to, be put to death. Again, as we, quoted in Revelations, 20 and verse 4, it says, and I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls. This is a vision that John was having, right? Of those who, ultimately put to death for the name of Yahweh Shem Shai's sake, right? It says, and I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Yahweh Shai, and for the word of the Most High, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Hamashiach 1,000 years. We're talking about the first 1,000 years, right? But it said they didn't receive the mark. They weren't with the system, because if you receive the mark by default, you are with, the system, right? You ultimately are consent unto the system, because that mark, that RFID micro CHIP, right, ultimately attaches you to the system, So this again, right? Some are gonna be, beheaded, Some of them are going to be put to death, man. But a lot of us are not going to be, Let's grab this real quick. Right, this is in Matthew 16:28. Yeah, Matthew 16:28. Verily I say unto you, there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom, right? So some of us are not, some of us are ultimately gonna, live, and as the scriptures say, to be pilgrims, right? Pilgrims among the earth, right? Moving around, having to, dodge this devil, you know. And miracles are going to be done for those, right? For those men, you know, and their families, and those that are with them. Those who truly believe, right? Miracles are going to be done for them, right? When Esau comes in like a flood, because we read Revelations 12:12, he's going to come down having great wrath. You know, when he comes down and does that, right, you best believe the Lord's going to raise up a standard for them. You know, as we read in Isaiah 59 and verse 19, it says, so shall they fear the name of Yahweh from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun, when the enemy, which we know the enemy is Esau, Edom, right? We're seeing him, you know, the way he's moving now, right? We understand the times that we're in, right? It says, when the enemy shall come in like a flood, the spirit of Yahweh shall lift up a standard against him. That's right, right? When you go into that word standard, let's grab it in the blue letter. 19. Shall raise up a standard right here. Strong's H 5127. It says to flee, which is Naas or Nas. It says to flee, escape, right? So the Lord's gonna allow us to escape those situations, man, right? However it happens. You know, we read in, you know, in another account, you know, going into you know, Elijah the Tishbite, right? Was that 1 Kings, the 17th chapter, if I'm not mistaken? Or the Lord ultimately allowed for him to, you know, and guided him to water in the midst of a drought, in the midst of a famine, had the animals bring him food, you know? When met up with a woman in the last little bit of meal and oil that she had, it just remained. It never expired, and it never, you know, dwindled. They were able to eat based off of that little bit every single day, right? Giving them that daily bread, right? Which we pray the Lord gives to us in the times to come, right? It says to take flight. So some people are going to receive spiritual power, you know, on this side. Be able to fly, super strength, you know, super speed, however it may be, right? It says to depart, disappear. It's heavy, right? To fly, to the attack on horseback, right? Because the Lord's going to allow us to, you know, fight back. You know? We're going to fight back against these damn devils, man. We're not just going to be, you know, hiding. And no, man. Esau come around. We got that spiritual power. And we fucking this damn devil up, man. You know, we're going to be pulling these, you know, after destruction, we've been pulling these damn devils out of these bunkers. You know, but even before then, man, these little fucking peons that think that their guns is going to be working, we're going to kill their ass, man. You know? This is why we don't fear. This is why we should not fear. You know, because Yahweh Shem El Shai has our back. You know, at all times. Right? We have to believe this. Be not afraid, neither doubt. Right? So as we see the times approaching, right, we got to remember these things, man. That Yahweh Shem El Shai, yes, some are going to have to perish, you know, and be put to death for the name of Yahweh Shem El Shai, to be tortured, right? But there are going to be a lot, right, that the Lord ultimately does miracles for in the times that approach these situations, man. You know? And I'm just, like I said, I'm ultimately rolling in the spirit, man. You know? Just kind of what was on my spirit after, you know, meditating on everything that's, you know, that's coming, you know, to warn those that are out here, you know, teaching and preaching, presenting their bodies a living sacrifice, man. Right? That we got to continue to meditate on these things that are coming, right? But at the same time, we got to balance it out. You know? Yahweh Shem El Shai is going to protect us, man. You know, these are the times that we're in, and we gotta remember these things, man. You know? Always. Right? Yahweh Shem El Shai has got our back, man. Matter of fact, I'll end out with that. Right? Yahweh Shai saying that he's with us always, right? Matthew 28 and the last two verses. Verse 18, it says, and Yahweh Shai came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Right? So again, remembering that Yahweh Shem El Shai has got our back, man. We're not alone, right, in this situation. Right? So just as, remember, again, I've been saying it lately, right? As the Lord puts us in these situations, remember that the Lord can get us out, you know? So that's all I got, man. Lord was edifying. Lord was straight to the point. I'm going to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, by Hashem, Yahweh Shai, by Hashem, Kakodash, Barakatah. Till next time, I say shalom.